Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, I'm honored to have been a guest on his podcast many times, yet for some reason, this is the first time he's joining me, probably because I never got around to asking him until now. Well, it's about darn time. You have heard him all over the place. You've heard him on WFAN. You have obviously heard his Giants coverage, and as pertains to what we're talking about today, his Knicks coverage with the Bank Shot Podcast. Very, very pleased to welcome to the show, John Schmeelk. John, how are you, my man?
Macri, what's going on, man? The eternal optimist. I'm happy to be with you. I'm afraid I'm going to annoy some of your fans today, but we'll see how that goes.
I remember way back when, before, I started doing more of this stuff and we would just interact on Twitter. We would always butt heads because you would be the, Debbie Downer and I'd be like, no, things are fine. And you,
John, it's called being a realist. First of all, it's not a Debbie Downer. It's called being a realist.
Is this true? No, but you were dead right, because I think back then it was the Mills regime, right? When we first started going back and forth. And I think I was trying to talk myself into, as much as talk other people into, the fact that, like, no, these guys, it may seem like they don't know what they're doing, but clearly they run a basketball team. They must know what they're doing, right? Apparently not the case.
I think we've all learned, John, just because you get a job doesn't mean that you're good at it. It doesn't matter what the job is.
And we could have a whole nother podcast about that, but we won't do that today. Maybe next time. So let's zoom out for a second. We are coming up. My goodness, I didn't even realize this when I asked you to come on. We're coming up on a year since, I think, Mills was fired. It was February, feels like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, something like that, right?
Yeah, give or take.
Yeah, and almost immediately Leon Rose was rumored to have the job, and it became official, I think, in early March. Just looking back at the last year, as someone who is a realist, how would you say that things have gone, big picture wise?
I'm very happy. I think Leon Rose has proven that he's pretty competent, to be quite honest with you. I loved all the front office hires that he made, including the head coach. He was not my first choice. I like Kenny Atkinson, but I think you can't argue with the results. And Thibodeau is my number 2 guy, so I was always fine with that. I think, the Walt Perrins of the world, the guys they hired in scouting, all those guys, Zanin, they are guys that have been around the league for a long time and are highly respected. They're not, legacy hires or friend hires. Like, say what you want. Craig Robinson, we know his connections on the planet Earth and who he knows. That's great. But what the hell do you know about basketball development besides the fact that he was friends with Steve Mills, right? So there are things like that where I feel like Rose is on the right path. He seems to be trusting Brock Aller the way they did free agency. They didn't do anything stupid, which is really, before you do anything good, you have to not do anything stupid. They did that. And I think you have to be pretty optimistic. I know people were a little concerned at the draft that, CAA guys, Kentucky guys, that's fine. I always looked at that 2 ways. And my thing was always, look, in a year where you don't have in-person workouts, very limited in-person meetings, you want to pick guys that you have the most intel on, right? So we're going to find out. It's pretty obvious already that Emmanuel Quickley was not a, pick that they made just because he's from Kentucky. The kid can play. We'll see about Obi Toppin, but I never had a huge issue with that. So I think big picture wise, I think you have to be pretty happy with the job Leon Rose has done. But, and I think you'll agree with this, John, we're not going to know for sure about how good he is and how this staff is until they make that first big move, whether it's a trade up in the draft, a trade for a star, something like that. That's when we're really going to know how these guys see players, see the league, and how they want to try to take that next step.
It's funny you bring that up, and I want to actually go back to something else you said in a minute. But first, let's stick with this. I remember the day that Gordon Hayward signed with Charlotte for 4 years, $120 million, which I think we could all agree that was not the big move that the Knicks needed to make. Me and JB were going back and forth via text, as we occasionally do. We're still fans, first and foremost, even with all the content that we produce. And he was trying to make the point to me because he talked about, you're the realist, he's the contrarian. So while everybody is praising Leon Rose and the Knicks for not doing anything stupid, his point was that, well, they're kind of getting praise for just being a normal, being a normal franchise, like not doing the stupid thing. And they haven't really yet shown us that they have, as you just said, been able to not only make a big swing, but have it be a smart swing and a timely swing. and a swing that, alternates the proper amount of risk versus reward. And it's interesting to me because now I think I agree completely with you. A year on the job, I'm thrilled with what he's done because what are we comparing it to? Mostly the previous 20 years, most of which have not been great. So I almost wonder at what point, and you've covered New York sports more than anyone in this town for a very long time. At what point do you think fans, I don't know if it was the average fan, maybe Twitter fans, like whatever, fans, will start to be like, okay, let's look at the old watch here. When is it going to happen?
Good question. And this is the point I always made too, back in the Mills regime, where people were kind of happy with the job Mills was doing. And they're like, oh, well, look at all these assets he's acquired. And my point was always, guys, it's easy to, tear something down and get picks. It's like, we're going to trade our best player and get 2 picks. All right, great. That's not hard, guys. Like, it's not like that's the easy thing.
Hey, Dennis Smith Jr. I don't know if you saw, he was putting up some dunks on the practice court in Utah. Very nice dunks. I'm sure it'll help him in game situations.
Hey, John, I'm not sure you heard, but he's reworked his jump shot, and he's had the best offseason of his life, by the way. It's amazing.
Lost 10 pounds. It's fantastic.
He's doing great. I think you're going to start, well, I guess depending on how this year goes, and we're going to have that conversation too, I'm sure. I think you'll start hearing some noise this offseason in terms of, are they going to use that cap space? I think fans are now getting they're getting optimistic. I think a little overly optimistic. And I think the expectations are going up because of who the coach is, how they're playing, all that sort of stuff. So I think you're going to start seeing that now, to be quite honest with you. Even at the trade deadline this year, I think there's a group of fans. I don't think the smart ones, but I think there's a group of fans that want them to try to trade for a Buddy Hield or someone like that to just add some shooting to that's my reaction too, to see if these fans could, see if the team can add some shooting and try to make like a little run this year, maybe get like the 6th seed or something like that. Now, I don't think they're going to do that, but I do think as Julius Randle shows that maybe he is a number 2 on a good team, and maybe RJ Barrett keeps shooting the way he is. We'll see. They want to add, some fans want to add pieces now. They don't want to wait. Remember, fans in the offseason wanted to trade. There's a vocal minority of fans that wanted to trade for Russell Westbrook this offseason. They were so impatient. So
I remember it well.
Those fans are going to be loud again, man. It's just kind of the way it is. And I think not a lot of people follow as closely as we do. This is what I've learned. We cater to the hardcore fans, right? The fans on Twitter that constantly comment about the Knicks are the hardcore fans. That's maybe 15%, 20% of the fan base.
I always wonder what percent. I'm like, is it 10, 15, 20%? It's low.
It's very, very low. And I think you're going to take a look at this now and all these casual fans that are just concerned with, is the team finally going to win games? And that's the group that's going to start getting vocal. And if the team stinks, they're going to tune it out. They're not going to care about them. But as the team improves and people start paying attention more, they're going to tune in a little bit and they're going to start be like, all right, well, we need to make a move. I'm going to give you a quote. This is from a political reporter that I follow, but this is something, and this is it, but it's not politics related. It's Twitter related.
Okay.
This is the quote. Let's not forget, Pew Research found that of the fewer than 50 million U.S. adults on Twitter, only 6% of those Twitter user accounts account for 73% of the tweets. And that's about politics. So I'm sure sports is smaller than that. That means fewer than 1% of Americans are frequently weighing in about politics on this platform. And you can imagine that's a much smaller percentage for sports. So when you don't judge the fan base solely by Twitter, because it's never going to be accurate.
Yeah, it's really well put and wisely pointed out. So here's the question that, again, I'm kind of just going off of what you're saying. Here's a question that I have, because I think there's 2 conversations that the front office could potentially be having. One is, and this is the thing I think that I was most concerned about and what I hoped that they were most concerned about all offseason. We just need to not be a laughing stock anymore. We need to avoid the daily or weekly, whatever segments on, the jump where Rachel Nichols and whoever else is like, hey, let's see what stupid thing the Knicks do, or let's try to make it out like the Knicks may be doing something stupid.
LOL Knicks, that you got to avoid that.
Yeah, no, it's LOL Knicks, right?
Yeah.
So let's make sure we're not that butt of jokes anymore. And I think thus, and then this could always change, right? It only takes one 5-game losing streak, and rumored players are starting to grumble about Tibbs, this and that. It only takes one, right? For now, they've escaped that. The other part of it, and I think this is what you just mentioned, is okay. In the NBA, the best path to winning is winning. And I think there is a line of thought that not necessarily going out and making a foolish trade, right? Like if they went and traded, again, not that they would do this, but like traded Emmanuel quickly for Buddy Hield or something like that. Again, that's a ridiculous example because they're not going to do that. But like the type of trade that like I feel like, you know, we heard rumored that some within the last front office wanted to do, like, let's go get D'Angelo Russell, right? I think there's dumb things, but then there's buy low opportunities, which is, I think, what they did this offseason. And maybe there may be a buy low opportunity because they have all this cap space before the trade deadline that does improve them, does maybe give them a better chance to make a run for the playoffs. That obviously takes away from the, you know, possibility or higher possibility of tanking for a better pick at the end of the season. That second question is the one that I'm wondering where their mindset is. And I know we've talked about this before. So where, if they, let's say, could get just throwing a name out there, like a Victor Oladipo for something that was not a lot, right? Like a Frank Ntilikina or a Dennis Smith Jr. and like, you know, a couple of seconds. I don't think that's going to be possible. Just for argument's sake, let's say it was. What would you say about that?
If it's that little and you're looking at like 2 2s and a Dennis Smith Jr. to get the upper hand on signing somebody like Oladipo after the season, yeah, I'd be willing to do something like that. I had Seth Partnow on the show, and I asked him how he thinks the Knicks could best use their cap space at the trade deadline, and he made the point that he thinks maybe the best way the Knicks can go about this year is to get kind of get ahead of free agency a little bit. So acquire a player now that's at the level of a player you could have gotten in free agency, but get him now. You know, maybe a team's trying to dump a $12 million a year player because they want to clear cap space or, you know, save money on their salary, whatever. You get that player now, and you're not getting him for this year per se, but you're getting him to help the team in future years. So, yeah, I'd be okay with that. I would not be willing to trade for a player that's a free agent after the season and give up a first-round pick. That I would not be willing to do. But I think if you're getting someone that can help you long-term and you're not giving up something of tremendous value, I'd be willing to do something like that. Yeah, no,
I'm with you. I think, look, and there's like, where's the line, right? Like if you could trade that there's that 2023 Dallas pick, which again, look at what's going. Maybe Dallas isn't the given that I know I profess them to be. You know, who knows? I think there's, again, potentially dicey questions, but I think in general I agree with you. I want to go back to something you said a minute ago because you were talking about connections and CAA and the whole thing. You've covered the Giants for a very long time, as deeply as anyone. And I feel like in football, especially, there's this idea, like the locker room culture aspect of it, or like who you bring into your community. Maybe there's more made of it in football than there is in basketball. I wonder if there's something. What are your thoughts on that generally, basically from, you know, covering all the sports that you've covered over the years?
I think it matters a lot more than the snarky analytics people say it does, but I'm not sure it matters quite as much as the people that hate the snarky analytic guys think it does. But I do think that there is a difference when you have certain guys in the locker room. And I do think football is different than basketball, right? Because football is a sport where guys are literally putting their bodies on the line every time they go out there, and you're risking life and limb every time you play a game. And you really need guys to go do everything every play and go all out every play. And part of that is the culture and getting them to go out and do that. And, you know, if you're a weak side defender, are you willing to run all the way across the field to be in position on the 3% chance a running back breaks 3 tackles? Yeah, well, you need to be able to, you need to do that. In the NBA, it's not the same thing. You got guys jogging up the floor, you know, every other possession, and that's fine. You can get away with that more. Maybe you shouldn't, but guys do it, and it's fine. James Harden, when he doesn't have the ball, stands in one place for literally 18 consecutive seconds. So, if guys did that in the NFL, they get eviscerated by their coaches. It just doesn't work that way. So I do think it matters. I do think, you know, having that all-in team attitude and having the right work ethic does count. I think we're seeing the Tom Brady effect down in Tampa, where they see, you know, they see how he works and they emulate that, his professionalism. I do think that's a thing in some way, shape, or form.
I just wonder because, you have these teams, and like I think Miami's as good as an example of it as anyone. Toronto or Tampa, I guess I should say now. It's so weird. The Spurs obviously have done it a certain way for a very long time. Other organizations clearly don't, and the Knicks have not. I wonder, because we've heard Tibbs talk repeatedly as we were waiting for Obi Toppin to come back, about the type of people that Quickly and Toppin were, and like the conditioning and like their character and their work ethic and all that stuff. I don't know. Something I've been thinking about, and I wanted to ask you because I know you cover football and I know that that's a big deal in football. But
well, John, let me ask you something. Do you think that Julius Randle's mindset changes offseason? Do you think that like Quickly's mindset and how he approaches the game is better than Dennis Smith Jr.'s? If your answers to those questions are yes, I think it shows that stuff is kind of important, right?
Yeah, no, and I think it is not. But again, there's a line because your roster is so much smaller in the NBA, and premium talent is. I mean, look at what the Nets did, right? They had all the culture in the world, and they, if you can get a guy who happy.
Bill Parcells coached Terrell Owens. If it's a star, you can figure things out.
That's a good call. He was in fairness though, he was maniacal about his fitness and work ethic and all that stuff. But
look, T.O. tried hard. He was just a lunatic. Right? I mean, that's
sorry,
what
that got me. Yes, he was a lunatic. I mean, why you don't do sit-ups in your driveway?
Shirtless, of course. Yeah, every day.
Those were the days. Okay, let's talk about this team. I'm optimistic about it. You're optimistic about it. They're 8-10. I think in no universe would I have ever thought to predict that they would be 8-10 after 18 games. That said, we're New Yorkers. We like to gripe. Give me your biggest gripe about the team so far.
I'm going to go in this direction, and maybe you can help me. I'm having trouble completely buying in here, John. I want to. I know they're better than they were the last couple of years. But I am not yet convinced that they're closer to being the 8th seed than they're closer to being a top 5 lottery team. I'm not there yet. We kind of go back and forth on DM on Twitter sometimes, and they're still one of the 3 worst offensive teams in the league. It's really hard to be one of the 3 worst offensive teams in the league and be a 8th seed. It's just really, really hard in the modern day NBA. In fact, I would almost say it's impossible. So then you go to the second half of this, and while their defensive effort is a lot better, and they are certainly a lot better than they were in past years, I'm still not sure that this team is a top 5 or 6 defensive team. Now, I think they're probably right around the middle of the league. I think if everything goes the way I think it'll go, they'll finish somewhere between like 12 and 15 in defensive rating, something like that, which is great. I would have signed up for that before the season. Great.
I think we all would have. Yeah, absolutely.
But if you're the 28th offensive team and the 15th defensive team, do you think you're closer to being the, 12th worst team in the league or the 5th worst team in the league? I think you're closer to being the 5th worst team in the league, right? So that's kind of where I'm at. And I think all the deep scars of watching this franchise over the past 15 years is making it difficult for me to buy in. Because, John, I want nothing more than to sit there and be like, oh, win every game, make a playoff run. This is great. I want to, root hard. I do this stuff for fun. This isn't my full-time job. I love the Knicks. I want them to win. So I would love nothing more than to do that. But part of me sitting there, I'm like, guys, we know they're not better than the Bucks. We know they're not better than Boston. They just and Indiana. They just happen to miss 1 million 3-point shots. So part of me wants to say the worst thing that can happen is this team winning a bunch of games they shouldn't just because other teams are shooting poorly. So at the end of the year, we have an overinflated opinion of how good they are. They get a worse draft pick. And then next year when the shooting normalizes, we're back where we started. That's what I'm fighting inside myself every time I watch this team play. Can you help me?
Well, I'm going to try. So a winning season in the NBA, unless you have a young star, right? Like a Ja Morant or someone of that ilk who's going to, and I don't know that we need to have a whole RJ Barrett thing on that. Like, can we just agree that, RJ Barrett is not in that category? Really nice, wonderful player. Love what we're seeing. Love the progress. Deserves all the credit in the world. He's not the guy that, like, okay, as long as we have him and he stays on just a normal track, we're fine as a franchise. Like, that's not okay. So like, unless you have that guy, the good season needs to yield some kind of fruit, whether it's, as we were talking about before, trading for someone at the deadline and then re-signing that person as a big piece or whatever, or you nail the draft, which becomes harder if you win, obviously. I think you're right. It can lead to a situation when you're like, okay, what are you gonna do for me now? In terms of what they are, we saw some of those, like, what was it? Speaking of David Fizdale, the Grizzlies teams, right? I actually don't think they were ever that bad on offense under Fizz. I feel like before Fizz got there, maybe they were like the top 5 defense and a bottom 5 offense. The Knicks are not a top 5 defense. I think you saw that the other night against Portland. Like, Portland had zero issue putting up 70 on them in the first half, right? And there's going to be nights like that. But at the same time, they fought back, and Tibbs, I think, believes that more often than not, the opposing 3-point shooting will normalize.
And by the way, John, to your point, on their prior coaches, the Knicks do not make a comeback in that game. They lose that game by 30 and they pack it in and they go home.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. And I think that's one of the encouraging signs you take from this year. It's interesting. I wonder if for most fans, Twitter fans or otherwise, I feel like if there was real cognizable progress from the young players on this team from now until the end of the year, and that includes Toppin. I think Toppin's a big part of that because they just drafted the guy 8th overall. And they ended up with the 6th worst record in the league, 7th worst record in the league, 8th worst record in the league. I think most people will be happy with that, don't you think?
Yeah. I don't think you need to be bottom 3 here. I just think you need a reasonable shot of getting into the top 4 or 5. And I think if you have the 6th or 7th worst records, 8th, whatever, you're in the neighborhood there. That's fine. I think the nightmare scenario is you finish like as the 11th best team in the Eastern Conference, and you're picking like
not even 12. In the playing game.
No, of course not, because it's the Knicks. Of course you wouldn't be. I think that's what you're worried about, and that can hurt you a little bit because, to your point, they don't have the guy yet. As good as Julius Randle is, he's not the guy. He could be your number 2 guy maybe, but he's not the guy. I think we're seeing the ceiling of your offense if Julius Randle's your engine. Now, I'm not taking anything away from him. He's been great. He's an all-star. He's playing almost at a 13 All-NBA level. He's been that good. Not taking anything away from the guy. He's fantastic, but he's still not your guy. You still need the guy. So you either get the guy in free agency, which, as we see, is really dependent on who's available, which is this offseason now. It's getting slim pickings, or you get him through the draft. So that's kind of where my mind is. You mentioned Toppin. Where are you with him? I thought his offensive game would be much more polished than it has been. I admittedly did not watch enough tape on him because I didn't think he'd be there, to be quite honest with you.
I don't think anyone did.
And I watched enough tape of his defense to know I didn't care what he did offensively. I didn't want them to really draft him, to be quite honest with you. But everyone talked about, how he's NBA ready. His offensive game is great. Let me ask you, John, how does Obi Toppin create his own shot?
He doesn't.
How do you pick a power forward 8th overall that can't defend and can't create his own shot?
Well, here's the thing. So I think he creates his own shot. No, I shouldn't say he doesn't. He doesn't right now. I think there is a world where he can, because, I've been joking on my own podcast frequently that, he's not playing the Fordhams and the Richmonds of the world anymore, where I don't know who was guarding him, but wasn't, Dayton had some games against more legitimate competition. And so he wasn't going against, these puny guys who were going to be bagging groceries after college all the time. And I think the post-up game and the face-up game that he showed is very real. More post-up than face-up. But I think the path for him, and this is where I get myself into trouble, because the idea of configuring your team to make it so that he's going to get to play some minutes at the 5, prominent minutes at the 5 moving forward. Like, people may not like that, but I think that's the path, right?
John, I'm with you. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think if he's your 5-man to roll and pick and pop with 4 other shooters around him, and he's that space player, he can catch it and pass off the pick and roll, or catch and shoot, or catch and dunk. That's his role. It's not Obi, here's the ball, go make a play. It's we run a pick and roll, then you make a play while you're in motion. And I think that's where it has to be. And when he's on the floor, no one's Noel, and no one's covering that guy because he can't do anything offensively, it's hard for him to play that role, I think.
I just sent out my newsletter today just as we were coming on. I should say we're recording this on a Tuesday morning because that's how we roll.
Life with kids, boys and girls.
I was about to say life with kids. It was implied there. But the numbers with him and Noel on the court together are let me put it this way: children should not look at it without an adult in the room being ready to hold their hand.
Is it that bad? Wow.
It's like 90 points per 100 possessions scored. It's ghastly. But again, that makes sense, right? Because there's not like there's some other shot creator there that's helping those lineups out. I mean, the shot creator in those lineups is the rookie you just picked 25th. That's it, right? So I completely agree with you. And look, let's also say this. The Stoudemire comparisons were there, coming into the draft. That dude made all NBA teams just getting fed by Steve Nash, right? Mm-hmm. And using his otherworldly athletic ability to convert those. And we've seen Toppin do that a few times. So I think if you're looking for a bright spot on Toppin, you say, okay, he could pass better than I thought. He hasn't been a train wreck on defense. And we've already seen the ability to finish those plays when he gets the opportunity to finish them. It's just the other stuff that it's like, but then, okay, so this is perfect lead into the next thing I wanted to touch on with you. You talked about Randall. Randall's really good. Kristaps or Randall right now, your pick on their current contracts, who you want?
Oh, Randall. It's not close.
Oh, I love it. No,
I mean, look, you have to the way that and you got to give him credit because I think his shooting has improved. I'm not sure if it's going to stay that way, and that's fine.
That's 34% from deep. That's not crazy.
3-point shooting is fine. I'm talking about like that deep,
the long
deep mid-rangers. Yeah.
Although that's come down in recent days, but yes, you're right.
It has. But no, look, Randall's been great, and I don't think his play is unsustainable. I think it's just his whole approach has changed, and his willingness to pass. I like to see turnovers go down a little bit, but look, he's doing this for the first time. You're going to have turnovers, and that's fine. The gravity he creates. Now, if they gave him some help and some more space with maybe a different lineup, which we could talk about, maybe he'd be even better. But look, I think at this point, Randall's contract's a bargain. Yeah. And, it's funny, before the year, we're like, oh, can you get rid of him? Do you trade him to get cap space?
Who wants this?
Right.
Yeah, that was the question. Who wants this contract?
You have to pay somebody to take him, right? Yeah. And I think now his contract's a bargain. Like, you pick up his option for next year. Oh. Like if there was a deadline and you had to decide today to pick up his option, you pick up his option. You don't even think twice about it, right? It's not even close.
It's not close. So that guy he's good. And fans, and I've had to bring it up a few times because you're always, we're Knicks fans. We're always thinking ahead. Do you trade him? Do you look no, you hold on to this guy for right now. You just drafted Toppin. Okay, great. RJ Barrett, the shooting is hopefully coming along. Never going to be a Dame Lillard at the wing. Let's just throw that out there, or whoever you want. Paul George, let's say. My God, that guy's hitting still, I think, above 50% from three. Anyway,
is he really? Wow.
His insane start to the year. He's been really good. Regular season P, I guess, is the name of the game. So if you're looking at upcoming decisions, I think Mitchell Robinson this year, I've been happy with him. I think how do you feel about Mitch's play overall? Not perfect, but I feel like I'm more happy than not happy with him.
I think he's taken a step back in terms of being a shot blocker, but I think that was a necessary part of his progression as an overall defensive player. So his block rate's the lowest it's ever been, but I think that's a good thing because he's fouling less. And I think he's kind of in the process, John, of finding that balance between being that disciplined defender that Tom Thibodeau's trying to get into his head and being a premier shot blocker. And I think the more he does it, the more he'll find that balance. And I think eventually he'll get back to blocking more shots without fouling. But I think it's kind of like Daniel Jones this year, right? He needed to take a step back to not turn the ball over as much, even if it means fewer big plays, because the turnovers are worse. The fouls were worse the fouls are more harmful than the blocks are helpful, right? So he has to cut down on the block shots a little bit to prevent the fouls. And then as he learns how to do that more consistently, more naturally, where he doesn't have to try not to foul, that's when the block shots will come back. So yeah, I think it's been a really good season for him. It's a big part of his progression, and I think you have to be happy with it. No question.
I agree. So okay, we're happy with Mitch. Now they could keep him on a very cheap deal for next year, and then he becomes an unrestricted free agent, which I think is something people have assumed, like, oh, they're never going to let that happen. I wonder at this point if, like, hey, you know what? Let's just maybe go ahead and pay the guy the $1.5 or $2 million next year, and then we'll see what happens after that. With the thinking being like you trying to think of here's another football comparison: running backs, right? Let's just draft the running back. Get him on his cheap deal. Is that what the center is in the NBA now? The running back equivalent? I don't.
Yeah, it's
unless you get a Jokic or one of these guys, right?
It's hard, man. I mean, I'm not going to say centers are a dime a dozen. I'm not ones that can be all defensive team type players, which I think Mitch still can be and is getting closer. Now, look, he's never going to be because he plays in a league with Rudy Gobert and Joel Embiid, so that's probably never going to happen until those guys either drop off or whatever. But look, he's good. But do you ever pay that guy close to, max money? I mean, I think no. I mean, I think like an 18 million, Julius Randall range, right? So that's the thing. I was watching some of the Pacers game last night. They're playing the Raptors, and there's Miles Turner, who's making $18 million a year, right? A contract with which, if you believe what was reported, Danny Ainge could have just taken on and was like, no, I'm good. I'd rather not pay my center $18 million. And I'm watching Miles Turner, and he blocks his shots. Sabonis went out early in that game. They still won. Turner was doing everything, defensively down low. He was made a little baby hook shot. He can make a three. That dude's making $18 million. And it's not looked at as like some crazy good contract. No.
Now I look at Mitch, I'm like, okay, he doesn't do anything else. And look, I've been a Mitch fan. I've been a Mitch fan.
Yeah, me too.
I'm still a Mitch fan for what he is. But we have to start to acknowledge, like, okay, this is what he is. Maybe improves defensively. And like, that's a guy that I'm not sure. Forget about 18. I'm like, is he a $10 million a year player, ideally, at this level? And I'm not even sure I know the answer to that question.
Not yet. And that's why maybe you let him get to unrestricted free agency. I mean, if you decide that you're willing to pay him a substantial amount, don't pay him before you have to, because you're going to have your bird rights on him anyway, and you can match whatever teams are going to throw at him, and you can keep him, right? Not technically match, but you know what I mean. You can go over the cap to sign him. So, yeah, I think Mitch is a tough one. Look, that's why people that were losing their minds about how could you trade Mitchell Robinson to move up in this draft, and I'm like, guys, you know what? I hate to tell you, if they really think. And this was not my opinion. This was my theoretical. If they really think LaMelo Ball is like the guy and is going to be like a star point guard in this league and it costs you Mitchell Robinson, adios. I mean, see ya. Sorry. I mean, the position's just so much more important that you have to make a deal that way. And I like Mitch too. I think he's a really good defensive player. I think he helps the team win games. But look, you get to this offseason, maybe Mitch gets packaged in a trade with somebody and you get another wing. Because John, look, this team needs another multifaceted wing that can shoot, score, and create their own shot. That's what they need. Assuming they're going to roll with quickly as the point guard. That's what they need. They need an RJ Barrett that can shoot. That's what they need. Okay. To match with him and
you have one of those lying around somewhere.
And by the way, I think you kind of need a center that can shoot if you're gonna play Julius Randle and RJ Barrett together. Can you play those guys together and have a good offense if your center can't stretch the floor? I don't know if you can. Let's be honest.
I think
and you have
so.
3 non-shooters.
We're obviously we're not even talking about Elfrid Payton because I think both me and you were of the opinion it's just a matter of. I think he's going to continue to start games actually. But we're assuming they eventually get a point guard who could make shots, right?
The fact that you waited this long to mention his name during this podcast is actually a minor miracle.
What is there to say at this point? I mean, like literally, what is there to say about Elfrid Payton? I don't. We all see it every night. It's tip season. He's not stupid. I just, I just don't think he wants to start a rookie. who's, not really playing a position he's comfortable with, but whatever. We don't have to talk about that. I said his name. That was enough. But no, I agree with you. They need to figure out a way to get more spacing on the floor. It's why I brought up Mitch, and it's why I want to talk about Toppin in that context, because all this stuff fits together, right? And I think just to bring it home, now it's been, I'm not saying that the last year has been easy for Leon Rose, but now's the tough part. Because now you have to take this interesting collection of guys who some of, good stuff has been happening, and you have to turn it into a basketball team. Because if you want to compete for a championship, forget about compete for a championship. Let me take that back. If you want to act like you're on the road to competing for a championship, you got to have a path to a top 10 offense. And that path doesn't exist right now. So I'm as curious to see what they do as anyone. Let's end here. Between now and the trade deadline, is there one, like, do you want them to go out and make a particular type of move? Is there a name you have on your mind? Like, what are you thinking between now and then?
It's a good question. There is not, and maybe I don't have a great feel yet for exactly where these teams are in terms of like what they're trying to do and like what teams are willing to give up. Like, are the Wizards willing to give up, right? Are they going to concede that they're not going to make the playoffs? I mean, they played so few games. I wouldn't if I were them, and they still have Beal and Westbrook and Bertans and all those guys. What teams are willing to throw in the towel here? I do think you need to turn that $18 million of cap space into something, whether it's a player down the road, or I'm probably still more on the line of picking up another future draft pick. Even if you're not making the pick, you can use it in a trade to send somewhere else. I don't know if you're finding a one somewhere. I think that can be pretty hard unless there's a team that, an owner out there that just wants to save some money. And
without giving up Randall, I'm trying to think who like Burks for bad money and a one and a late one.
It could do it.
But where's that? It's like you look. Trust me, I've looked around the league, and there's not an obvious fit anywhere.
I mean, Miami, maybe if they're trying to get rid of some money for the offseason, like, something like that. But no, I'm with you. I think it's really hard to find. So I think that's why our first question that we talked about, right, was how good Leon Rose's signings have been in the front office. I think this is why you hire those guys, right? Brock Aller should have a, spreadsheet on a whiteboard on his wall or on his computer that lists all the potential assets that they could acquire with that money. I'm sure he knew what the assets were this offseason before he even decided not to spend that money in free agency. So go after those guys, whether it's to improve the team down the road and even help the team to close the season this year, as an unintended consequence, or it's another draft pick. Any of those ideas are fine. Because look, John, here's the thing too. Like, if you get another draft pick down the road, even a couple twos, right? The Knicks are sitting there this year. You're probably going to have, as bad as Charlotte and Detroit are, you're probably going to have 4 picks in the top 40, right? Give or take.
Well, three in the top 32 or 3, because I watched I know the Pistons won last night against the Sixers. I watched some of the game. They're not a good basketball team. They're going to be bad. So
look, if you get another future pick and then you have all those picks, even if you wind up with the 9th pick in the draft, I think you have so many young guys already. That's when you can really start having a conversation about consolidating picks and make it a swing and move it into the top 5. So that's where those assets come in, not to just pick another guy at 27 or whatever. I don't care about that at this point, but you can combine those picks to move up to get that premium player, which I still think is the goal here. And I think this is where I'll leave you, John. Every move the Knicks make, and this has been the case for the last 2 or 3 years, even when they had Porzingis, because he was never going to be a 1. He was at best going to be a 2, maybe a 3. And frankly, that's what I think RJ Barrett is too. I think Barrett's most likely career trajectory is a good all-around player that can do a little bit of everything, never is a great shooter, but maybe can become a competent league average catch and shoot guy, and he's your 3rd best player on a good team. But I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that you're running your offense through down the stretch of a game. You need a basket down too late. I mean, we saw they tried that against which team was it?
I know the game you're talking about. I can't think of it either.
And he was literally stripped by a power forward and a center on 2 consecutive possessions. And you sit there and you're like, look, I know he's young.
I was about to say I'm gonna get slings and arrows coming at me if we don't put out we know he's 20.
Yes.
But you You know it when you see it in the NBA.
Yes.
And I just like I'm not saying he can't be very, very, very good.
Hey, look, John, by the way, if he ends up being a player that averages 18 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 5 assists, and shoots 45% from the field, that's pretty good. I mean, there are a lot of third draft picks that are third overall picks that are like out of the league in 5-6 years. Look, the NBA draft is tough. It's a really tough thing. So that's fine. But that still means you got to find your 1 and your 2. So every move the Knicks make has to have that in the back of their head. Does this move make it more likely for me to be able to acquire that number 1 or number 2 guy that you need, whether it's to pair with Julius Randle or not, to take that next step? And you know what? Maybe you get to the point in order to get that 1, maybe Randle has to be part of a trade. And if that's the case, okay. If you're trading Randle, but you're getting back the number 1, that's fine. You're not trading Randall for like the 22nd pick in the draft, but if he's a package for like a Bradley Beal, just to throw a random name out there, who you know, and again, he averages 35 points a game, but the team never wins. How good is he? But you understand my point. If you're trading him with other assets for a better player, sure. But that's what every move the Knicks have to make has to revolve around. Are you either collecting assets or putting yourself in a better position to find a superstar, whether it's in the draft, free agency, or in a trade? Any of those avenues at this point can work. And I think that's what they have to do. And look, if anybody understands it's a star-based league, John, it's the guy that ran CAA. I mean, who else would understand it better than that? In order to win in this league, you need not 1, not 2, probably more like 2.5 all-star caliber players on your roster, if not 3. All right. That's just the way it is. Unless you have, 2 of the top 5 players in the league, like LeBron and Anthony Davis, and nobody's going to have that. You need about 3 guys that are all-star caliber on your team in order to make a run here. So that's what the goal has to be. Don't just improve at the margins for a chance to get the 10th seed with some guy that's okay. That's how I look at it. That's what they need to do. I wish I had a better idea for names. I just don't see any obvious targets out there right now. But it's the NBA. The good thing, one player gets mad and gets disgruntled, and it can happen at any time. Anything can happen, my friend.
It is the most gruntled league in the league in the world. John, it really is always a pleasure to talk to you because we think so much alike on so many things. So it's like, it's great. And you always shed light on stuff that I honestly don't always think about. So,
and we didn't talk about Frank. That's a miracle too. No Frank Ntilikina talk today, John. The bingo card remains unfilled.
I feel like I should have. If there's a beer bottle with some left in the bottom, I would pour one out right now.
Now, by the way, are you still a property owner on Ntilikina Island, or have you completely sold all your property? Are you out?
I don't even know how to answer that question anymore because I'm convinced he's not going to get the chance here. So does that make me am I like now? Is there like some kind of what do they put the sticker on your house when it's no longer fit to live in? Maybe that's what they've done. They've come and put the sticker on my house like, yes, you have the house here, but you can't live in it anymore because you. Yeah. But I'm not going to say I'm convinced he's played his last minute for the Knicks, but it wouldn't shock me if.
Well, here's the thing: Austin Rivers and Reggie Bullock are always hurt. Like, honestly, like all jokes aside, and so is Elfrid Payton, by the way. Like that Elfrid Payton injury can't be that far away at this point. It's coming. And again, this isn't me rooting for injuries. This is just facts. You look back, Reggie Bullock's hurt all the time. Elfrid Payton's hurt all the time. And Austin Rivers, not as much, but he's had some injury issues this year too. 1 or 2 of those guys go out, then the door opens all of a sudden. And all the guy needs to do is hit, catch, and shoot threes. If he can do that, that's all he needs to do to be an effective player. And he was doing it to start the year. So
and that's why I'm still on his island as a guy who could be a good NBA player. I just think I have a funny, and I mean, look, you never say never. Because who knows? All it takes is, again, an injury. He comes in, looks the part for a couple weeks, and all of a sudden the brass is like, you know what? We really need to try to keep this guy around. I just think as of right now, I have a feeling his camp wants to get out of town, and I have a feeling like the Knicks are like, well, we're not going to beg you to try to, I think that's where things are. But,
and by the way, I think Tibbs actually does like the kid. I think
he does too.
Likes him. I really don't.
Absolutely.
I just think he thinks that these other guys right now are probably a little bit better. I think that's how he looks at it.
And you know what? Maybe he's not wrong.
No, he might not be wrong.
It is what it is. Frank Island. We had to talk about Frank Island. Goodness gracious. John, can you please tell the folks at home, for anybody who for some reason does not know where to find you and your stuff, where they can find you and your stuff?
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at Schmeelk. Shockingly, nobody else had the username, SCHM 2 E's LK. You can also find my written work at WFAN.com and The Bank Shot, my Knicks podcast, which is at radio.com, WFAN.com, all your favorite podcast platforms. And if you're a Giant fan out there, you can also check out all of my stuff on Giants.com. The Senior Bowl is this week, which is not being televised on NFL Network, apparently. So I'm going to have to, lift mountains to try to find some tape of that to write articles off of it, which I think I found, by the way. So make sure you check that out. And if you need podcasts on the Giants, we have our Giants Podcast Network. You can find it again, all your favorite podcast platforms, the Giants mobile app, and at giants.com/podcast. Our daily live show is Big Blue Kickoff Live every day at noon, full hour. We take phone calls, talk Giants with you. So make sure you guys go out there and check it out.
Very last thing, Super Bowl pick.
I can't pick against Patrick Mahomes. I can't. I wanted to pick the Bills to upset them, but I can't. Look, you got to give Brady credit. I'm not a Tom Brady hater. He's an awesome player. So to me, but I think Patrick Mahomes makes enough plays. I still don't trust that Tampa defense. Say what you want. The Packers moved the ball up and down the field all day on them last week. They just did. And I think the Chiefs
Rodgers wasn't great when it counted.
No, he wasn't. And look, that interception before the half and then that pass over the top is what lost the game. Talk about the fourth down decision at the end, all that stuff. That's fine. It was that play right before the first half ended that lost that game for Green Bay. It was the interception and the deep pass. So how about this? I'll give you a score even. Give me Chiefs 34-27. Tom Brady will tie the game late, and then Patrick Mahomes will go down and win the game for the Chiefs. How about that?
I want an entertaining Super Bowl Sunday, so I'm going to root for that.